This lesson is about solving equations by taking square roots. And before we get into actually the solving the equations by taking the square roots, I want to review a little bit the different types of solving that you may or may not have come up with up until now before we get to this section. So the first one I want to review is just solving a regular equation. Now, I wrote down here 2x plus 2 equals 6. And as you know, the idea is to isolate the variable, get it alone, move everything over, and get an answer. And when we do that, here's the first thing we do. We isolate. We're going to move whatever is added or subtracted to that variable, which happens to be this plus 2. We subtract 2 to both sides. What we do to one side, we do to the other. And we are left with 2x equals 4. And then from here, 2 times x equals 4. We're doing the opposite, so we're going to divide both sides by 2. And we get x. 2 divided by 2 cancels out. X equals 2. And that's how we solve for an equation. So the idea is to isolate the x. And if you'll notice a little hint, when you're solving equations, the variable you're solving for, the number of solutions will depend on the power of that variable. So this has a 1, which is not written there, but it's understood, x to the 1 power, and there is going to be one solution. Now we're going to walk into the quadratic equation. Now, before we get into using the square roots, I just want to review using by factoring, solving by factoring. So here we have an quadratic equation, x squared minus 2x minus 8 equal to 0, and we're going to factor it. So we look to see if there's a leading coefficient here, and there isn't, so that makes life easier. And we're going to create 2 parentheses equal to 0, right? Now, the first one, the x squared, we write x times x. And now we're going to look at our last one, which is negative 8, right? And we have to think of what two numbers, when we multiply, give us negative 8, that when we add them, gives us negative 2. So we'll start with negative 8 times 1, which is negative 8. But when I add them, I get negative 7. So that's not the answer. And then we'll try, let's see, this is negative. So we're going to try 4 times 2. And I'm going to make the 4 negative because my middle term is negative. When I get that, when I multiply, I get negative 8. And when I add them, lo and behold, I get negative 2. And that's my answer. So minus 4 plus 2. Awesome. Once I have that, to find the zeros, I basically understand that zeros mean, or to solve by factoring, to make this whole thing 0, what's inside this parentheses, when it's 0, it makes the whole thing 0, because 0 times x plus 2 will give me 0. And whatever number, if I can change this, whatever number I can change this to make this parenthesis 0, will make this whole thing 0. So the way we do this is we separate them. We say x minus 4. So what number do I need to make this equal to 0? And I do that by adding 4 to both sides. And I get x equals 4. That is one of my solutions. Now I'm expecting 2. Why am I expecting 2? Because my highest power is 2. So now we'll try this one. X plus 2 equals 0. And I subtract 2 from both sides. That cancels out. X equals negative 2. And there's my second solution. Because there's an x squared, that's my highest power, I'm going to have 2 solutions. Now, this is what we have done up until now, right? Usually, as you do your algebra course, you start with simple equations, then you work with factoring and finding the zeros, and now we're going to work with another way to solve a quadratic equation, which is taking the square roots. So, the nice thing about this is you really don't have to, you can factor it. You'll get the solution by factoring. And here's the other way that we can do this, is get the solution by taking the square root. And just like we did with our very first equation here, just like this one where we had to solve for x, we're going to do the same thing. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll start with, we need to get this x squared alone. So we're going to add 8 to both sides, right? And we get 2x squared equals 8. And then we are going to divide both sides by 2. And that gives us x squared equals 8. Now there's going to be 2 solutions here. And basically the thought process is this. Okay, so what times what will give me 4? Very simply, you think, okay, 2 times 2 makes sense, right? Okay, the square root of 4 equals 2. Right? It makes all the sense in the world, but there's another number that works for that as well. And if you think about it, here we have 4. What times what will give me 4? Well, it also happens to work that -2 times -2 also gives me 4, right? And so therefore, I like to think of it as x squared equals 4. Whatever number is this, it could be, I like to think of it as the positive and the negative. Okay, so we're going to say x squared equals 4 positive, x squared equals 4 negative. Hold on, sorry, never mind that. Okay, so we're going to take, that's the positive, that's the negative. All right, we're going to take the square root of this side and the square root of that side. Square root of this side and square root of that side. And we get x equals, what's the square root of 4? 2. X equals, this is going to be negative, what's the square root of 4? 2. And those are our 2 possible answers. So that's how you do this. Highest square root, 2 answers. A 2 has to be 2 answers. Those are the possible answers that make sense. And if we plug it into here, we see that 2 squared is going to give us 4 times 2 is 8 minus 8 is 0. And -2 squared is going to also give us 4 times 2, which is 8 minus 8 equals 0. Now let's look at our next example. All right, let's do this. First, we are going to solve for x like we did in our very basic algebra equation. So we're going to get these x squared alone. We need to subtract 6 from both sides. All right, that gives us 3x squared equals 27. Makes sense? Okay, 27 plus 6 gives us 33. And now we're going to divide both sides because this is a 3x squared, 3 times x squared. We're going to divide both sides by 3, and we get x squared equals 9. All right, now we're going to start the positive, the negative. Okay, well, we get x squared equals 9. X squared equals 9. I take the square root of this side and the square root of that side. X equals 3 positive, because this is the positive side. X equals 3 negative. And because this is an x squared, and when you multiply two negatives, you get a positive, this works. Highest is a square root, that's 2. We should have 2 answers. My 2 answers are 3 and -3. Now, when you have a word problem, sometimes because of maybe it's length or width or something like that, or time, the negative gets canceled out because it doesn't make sense when answering the word problem. But when we're just doing these equations, it could be 2 answers, right? So that's how we're solving equations, by taking the square roots. And let's do one more here, so you take a look at that. And we're going to do this one. Now, this is a little bit different than the other ones. We have to look at this and we have to say, okay, 3 times x minus 5, close parentheses, squared equals 18. There's nothing to work out in here in these parentheses, which order of operations tells us to look at first. And if we square this out, we're going to get a big, long thing. We want to get this x alone. So the easiest thing to do right here is hold on, and we're going to move this 3 over. How do we move it over? Because we're trying to get this x alone, right? We're going to move whatever is multiplied or divided to it. So I can divide this whole thing divided by 3. And that results in the following. Now let me do that in red. Right? That results in these 2 cancel. X minus 5 squared equals 6. Okay, well, now what we have to look at, we're going to take the square root of both sides because that's an x squared. So we're going to take the square root here and square root there. All right, that will give us x minus 5 equals the square root of 6. Okay, now we're going to look at the positive and the negative. Okay, because this could be positive or negative. All right, so x minus 5 equals square root of 6. Well, to get the x alone, we add 5 to both sides. Let me do that in red. I'm enjoying this black pen here. Okay, so we get x equals square root of 6, positive square root of 6, plus 5. Okay, and the other one here we get, all right, this is the negative, x minus 5 equals negative square root of 6. All right, and then we are going to add 5 to both sides. And I can't add, this has, by the way, this is, you know, this has the radical and this one doesn't, so we can't put them together. Although if we made this into a decimal, then we could add or subtract them. So x equals negative the square root of 6 plus 5. And that's our answer. This is one answer and this is the other. Now you can find the decimal with the square root of 6. We could find that, right? If we wanted to. Let's turn this on. Oh, if only I could figure this out. On. Okay, there it is. So if we were to take the square root of 6, oops, wrong way. Oh, I did it again. Okay, we would, oh well, anyway, we would get the square root of 6. Never mind about that. We would get the square root of 6 plus 5, or the negative square root of 6 plus 5. Square, x squared, right? This is squaring, and 2 answers. And that's how you solve these. Good luck when you try your practice problems.